Welcome back to the Running Explained podcast. Hi, I'm Coach Elizabeth, and I'm here to break down the science of running in a way that actually makes sense. Whether you're training for your very first race, aiming for a new PR, or just trying to be a more balanced runner, this podcast is your go-to spot for all things running. At Running Explained, running is more than just about logging miles. It's about becoming the best version of you. That's why we talk about more than just improving your fitness, but how to support your physical, mental, and emotional health too, so you'll see improvements that go far beyond race times. And if you're looking for more support, I've got you covered. Whether you're interested in one-on-one coaching, following a structured training plan, or joining our supportive group coaching, I've got options to meet you where you are and help you level up. Ready to dive in? Let's go. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Running Explained podcast. I am your host, Coach Elizabeth, and this week we're diving into a conversation centered around the question/feeling of the fear of running out of time to achieve your goals as you age. Maybe this is something that you've briefly entertained but haven't really thought about. Or maybe this is something that you're finding slip into your thoughts more and more often. Can I still keep getting faster? Do I still have time to achieve those big goals before I start to slow down? How much time do I have left before my fastest days are behind me? If you've ever felt like the clock is running out on chasing your big running goals, this episode is for you. Whether you're 25, 75, or anywhere in between, or to be honest with you, if you're just anyone. Joining me for this conversation is returning guest, run coach, and masters runner, Sara Manderscheid. And together we're talking about how to adjust our goals without limiting ourselves, really embracing the process of training to be just as valuable as the outcome, and how and why recovery plays an even bigger role in our training as we age. Before we even get started, spoiler alert, I'm going to say this up front. Most of us have way more potential than we realize. And most of us are capable of doing much more than we even thought possible. What does this mean? This means that for everybody, all of us who are slowly starting to freak out that maybe we can't run that big goal that we really wanted to run before time inevitably starts to slow us down. You don't know that until you try, and you might be surprised what could happen if you stop believing that there is an expiration date and just keep going. Remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. Sara, welcome back to the show. So excited to have you here.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for having me back. It's great to be here.
So I was saying you are my very first guest in the new Running Explained podcast studio. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, that's where we are.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. It's very well branded.
Amazing what a little paint can do. It's amazing what you can do when you walk into the Ace Hardware and you ask them to tint a hex code because it's the blue of your brand. And they're like, this isn't a color. I'm like, no, it's a color. Just it's not one you know. So for our listeners who might not have heard your previous appearances on the show, go ahead and briefly tell us, Sara, who are you?
Yeah, I am a runner. I am a master's runner, and I'm also a running coach. I'm based out of Boulder, Colorado. I have my running team called the Elevate Your Running Team. They're all over the country. I also have a group practice in Denver, in Boulder. I also am a host of a podcast myself called the Elevate Your Running Podcast. And there's so many things that I love so much about running. And it's just a cool place that I get to be not only in my personal life, but also as a coach and sharing that love with the runners.
So our conversation today came out of us chatting after I was a guest on your episode, your podcast recently, talking about returning to running after taking a break. And obviously as coaches, we deal with this. Also think about my personal life and this idea of fear of running out of time to achieve your running goals because of age. And I know this is something that we're going to have a really good conversation on. And so I wanted to let everybody know that's what we're talking about today. But before we get started, I want to do something new and fun. where I'm going to ask you 3 questions because I want to get to know you a little bit better, even though I know you pretty well, but have our listeners get to know you a little bit better. So these are for fun. You don't have to overthink it, but I would like to know. So, my first question to you, Sarah, is if you could have a guaranteed entry, all expenses paid trip to any race in the entire world, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. I would say the Paris Marathon because I know it's a tough course, it's hilly, it's going to be a challenge, and also who doesn't want to go to Paris?
All expenses paid, Paris. Even better. All right. And what is your run fuel of choice these days?
Oh, that's a great question. I have been leaning into the SIS beta fuel gels. They've been a little hard to get a hold of lately. So my secondary go-to has been the precision fuel. And they have an excellent one that has 100 milligrams of caffeine. And I'll typically take that one either before like a hard workout or maybe in the middle of a long run that has some quality in it.
And both those are both considered higher carb, like 30 grams per gel, right?
Yeah, so the SAS beta gel has 40 grams of carbohydrates, which I
Woo!
really love. I've had to train my stomach on that gel quite a bit. Precision has 30 grams. They're both excellent. I was on the Spring Energy train until
Mm,
I
it crashed
wasn't with, I
until it
think, a lot.
derailed.
Yeah. The train derailed for many of us. So I wanted to quickly switch into something that was similar to what I thought Spring Energy had. And it's been a journey training my stomach and getting the fueling dialed in.
Yeah, it is a journey. I'm glad you mentioned that. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Spring Energy Awesome Sauce, it was a long story short. Third party testing revealed that a previous what was reported to be a high carbohydrate gel had like a third the number of carbs they said it did. Like it was supposed to have 45 and it had like 19.
Yeah, which isn't enough if you're going into a hard effort. Like it's barely anything. And I was using those for a lot of my half and marathon races during 21, 22, 23, up through I think maybe mid-year last year when all the news came out about it. So yeah, it's definitely not enough to race strong and feel good, especially in the second half of those races.
Ah, all right, moving on because that is a
Yeah.
sad topic. All right, so last question. What is your all-time favorite Holy Grail running shoe you've ever had?
Oh gosh. I would say I really love the Adidas Adios shoe. It's like they have a Boston edition. And I say that because it was the first shoe I bought when I was training for my first marathon. And I had this big goal of running a BQ marathon for my first marathon. Now, backstory is I ran a lot of half marathons, got my half marathon time down fast enough where I felt like going after a BQ time in my first marathon was it was realistic or there was a chance to do it. So I bought this shoe and it had the Boston unicorn on the back heel. Not like I could see my heel, right, when I'm running, but they were like neon yellow and I would wear them for every long run. I would wear them on occasionally like an easy effort day. And that shoe has stayed in my rotation over the last 5, 6 years. And it's a shoe that I really love. You can make it into a tempo shoe if you want. It's pretty lightweight. It's certainly a great long run shoe. And then sometimes, yeah, I actually wore it this morning on the treadmill for like my easy day. So I love that shoe.
That's awesome. A trainer with an emotional backstory
Yeah.
and all-round credentials.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, our topic today, we're talking about this idea, this concept of having running goals and feeling the crunch of time as we age, that the goals that we have not achieved, we are starting to worry or wonder if we'll ever achieve them because of where we are like in our lives, like getting older. I'm going to preface this by saying, so I'm 37 and I have noticed that as I age, everybody younger than me is like, oh my God, you have so much time. Like you have so much time. Because I think for me, like I also want to still think like, oh, I have so much time. But I also do genuinely want to say to anybody out there who is under 35, who has a direct current concern that your performance is about to tank because of your age, you have so much time. You are still very young, but I think for a lot of us who are mid 30s into 40s, obviously we get 50s, 60s and beyond, there are the clock starts to feel like it is ticking. So, not for everybody,
Yeah.
right? Not for everybody, but for some people.
Yeah.
Sarah, when did this first pop into your head that you might be working on a timeline to achieve specific goals?
Yeah, I was right around your age. I was like 38-ish. And I remember thinking I'd like maybe like two hard days in a row or like two tough workouts. And I thought, is this it? Is it all downhill from here? Like I've just strung together like 2 days that just don't feel good. And when you're younger, most days feel good. You have the energy to get out the door. The recovery isn't as much. And then, of course, as you get older, there's different things that happen and you get to lean into other things. But it was right around like 37, 38 where I thought, how much time do I have left?
And I think some of this is how much of it is founded versus unfounded, right? Because there's no denying that as we age, the way that we train does need to adjust, right? We are not resilient 22-year-olds forever. But at the same time, how much of this is real? Like how much of it is just us being told, "Oh, you're getting old, things just start to kind of fall apart now."
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that. Like in the media and other sports, we see professionals, and even I guess in the sport of running, we see professionals retire in their 30s. When I was younger, like let's say I was in my teens, I always wondered why basketball players retired when they were like 35. I'm like, that seems so young, but now I get it. Now I'm on the other side of 35. I mentioned I'm a master's runner. There are a lot of things that come into play as we get older. And we hear from the media all the time about, age is so important and we want to fixate on the youth. But I think it's really important to know like we can do a lot of things in the sport of running. Our training age comes into play quite a bit. And it gets to be something that we're going after our goals, we're achieving our goals, we're making gains in this process through as we age, and we can shift and pivot and do a lot of different things to kind of make that all happen as we get older, which is really cool.
So let's say somebody says to you, Sarah, like, no, 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 I get that. That sounds really nice, but I really want to achieve this very specific before I can no longer achieve it anymore. Do you have any goals that you would like to achieve in your, let's say, kind of like the before you peak in your running abilities?
Yeah, personally, I have some pretty big goals in the marathon distance. That's kind of like the one distance that I really want to get this certain outcome goal, which is a sub 3 hour marathon. I recently ran a 3:08 in Indianapolis, so I'm close, but I'm also very far away. Like it's still 8 minutes, and those 8 minutes and 26 seconds are a really, in my mind, I kind of make it out to be this really big jump that I have to make. And that distance really is like the one distance out of all the distances that I'm really focused on. But I think once I get as far as I can get in the marathon, whether that is running a sub 3 hour or getting as close to 3 hours as possible, I may shift to shorter distances. I may shift to trails. There's just so much possibility when it comes to this sport with the distances that we have to kind of play around with and see where our unique ability lies.
The marathon is tricky in and of itself, but that's a really good point about the goal. You said, go as far as you'll be able to go with the
Mhm.
marathon. And that is something where when we talk about striving for goals with the specific outcome attached to them, how much is it really about the outcome and how much of it is about the process of trying to achieve the outcome? Because a really good question I got as I kind of put this out there on Instagram, a sticker, and asked, hey followers, do you feel any concerns about, running out of time to achieve your goals as you
Mhm.
age? And so one of the kind of responses I got was a question that was, well, how do I adjust my goals without discounting what is possible?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I don't think you have to discount your goals. I think, like, I recently ran a 5K in Houston and I was going after this big goal, which probably now looking back, and some people had said to me before I ran this goal or before I ran this race, that it was a bit unrealistic because I ran a marathon 10 weeks before this 5K, right? And I think sometimes my mind is still very young and I still think I'm that 20 something runner that can just go out and do whatever I set my mind to. And so I ended up falling short of my goal. And at first when I saw the time, I crossed the line, I saw the time. So outcome focused, I was disappointed. And then I quickly shifted and I thought, you know what? No, I'm so proud of this because I really worked as hard as I could. I gave my best in training. I shifted when I needed to. I was flexible in the workouts. I ran on effort when I needed to. And I just kind of reminded myself of all the process oriented pieces to get to this finish line and to get through this race. And that was really like the big piece to this race. So I think when you can go out there and say, I did my best today. I did my best in the training cycle. I gave it my all. I really focused on the processes. That is the win. And then of course, if the outcome goal is there, hooray, you got that too.
That's always something I remind my athletes. Like if you can run a race you're proud of, it doesn't really matter what the time is.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting thing to think about where I think a lot of this comes back to the thing that we always want but can never have is the guarantee or like to know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I would be interested to know if anybody has said this to you in your as a coach, like, hey, Coach Sara. But I've definitely had runners say to me something to the effect of, well, I really only want to spend the time training for this goal if I know it's something I can achieve, right? I only want to train for this marathon if I know I can run this time. I only want to train for this if I know that I'm like, going to get what I, set out to achieve. And on one hand, you could argue, well, that's somebody who wants to see a return on their investment, right?
Sure.
And on the other hand, it's saying, that's not the point. Like, I get it. I get where you're coming from and I
Yeah.
understand it, but that's not the point of doing this.
Yeah, I have some athletes that I coach that are very outcome focused, and something that I've been sharing with them is when we sign up to do this sport, when we sign up for a race, we are actually signing a silent contract that we don't know that we're signing, that training is not linear. Racing is not linear. And if you want to be in this sport, you have to find a way to be okay with the outcomes not coming to fruition sometimes, right? Like it's not going to be this like steady PR city all the way through your running journey. I mean, obviously as a new runner, you're going to see a lot of growth, a lot of big stepping stones. You're going to be PRing everything, which is so fun. I had an athlete, she ran her third marathon at Houston in January, and she PR'd the 5K, the 10K, and the marathon, which was pretty wild. She definitely like was that textbook definition of she warmed up for 20 miles and then absolutely raced the last 10K. But I think it's really important to know, like, when you get into the sport, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are going to be those harder training cycles, maybe those tougher races, but they all help us learn and grow if we choose to look at it that way. And then we can use that in maybe our next prep to become stronger, faster, happier runners.
Some of the responses that I got from people who said it wasn't a concern, like, no, I'm not concerned about this. It was very interesting. So, no, I just started running a couple years ago, right? So, acknowledgement that
Yeah.
they are still new, even being over 40. I know kind of who some of these people were, so I do know a bit about them for some of them. This person says, nope, not at all. This is not a concern. So either it's not something they ever care to think about, or they just are like, no, I'm going to keep going until I can't. I started running consistently in my 40s. I still have lots of room to grow. No, I'm more worried about not doing the right care right now to be able to run when I'm older. So I think I'm more worried about, laying a base for longevity. And then this one is my favorite. Nope, the BQ times just keep coming closer, which is true, which is very true. That is a huge silver lining to aging up. Is that your qualifying times get, a little bit closer.
Yeah, I know. That I mean that is such a fun piece to it. And I think it's really cool all those answers. Those runners are in the now. They're in the present. And we talk about that as coaches all the time, right? Stay in the mile that you're in. Stay in the rep that you're in. Stay in, the training week that you're in. And I think it's really cool that those runners are staying present to where they are. They're not worried about the future. They're not having and creating that anxiety of the what if, when do I get slower? Because it could be such a slow descend down the mountain, if you will, that it's not something that we're going to see or feel right away. And I think that's something that maybe isn't talked about enough. Like, what is it going to feel like? It's probably going to feel a little bit different to everyone, but it's probably not going to be this drastic and dramatic difference. Like I shared earlier in the episode, I had two bad workouts or two, like what I would consider quote unquote bad or tough days. And I'm like, oh, this is it. I don't think it's going to happen that way.
And just
Yeah.
like you said, obviously progress isn't linear. I can't imagine that when we do eventually hit our own individual peaks, no matter where they fall on how old we are, it's also not a linear descent, right? Like it might be that depending on your experience and what you're, more inclined to, you may still be able to improve your performance in some capacity, but maybe not in others. So I'm thinking, well, maybe you can still PR the half marathon, but like your fastest 5K days like are over. And that's always, it's interesting to think about, but it's probably not something that you're going to notice until in hindsight you're like, maybe that's what's been happening. But more than two workouts, much longer timeline.
Yeah, please don't jump the gun and think like everything's just like going downhill. Yeah, I think it's going to be this slow, drawn out process, probably over the course of multiple years, where you're noticing like there's more races that maybe are feeling harder or that you're not kind of getting that outcome that you're seeking. You're noticing training is different, or maybe you're noticing that you need to set up your training differently. I'm a big believer in recovery, and over the last few years I've really like elevated my training, and I run a lot. I run hard workouts, I run hard long runs, and I really have to make sure that the recovery side of that is there, or I'm not able to do everything that I want to do. And I also think, on the other hand, training is going to have to start to look differently at some point. And that could be enough of a catalyst to get a training stimulus to be faster, or it's just is what it is. And the training's different and it's where we're at in life.
I was going to ask you if there's anything that you have specifically done differently in the past few years to support where you are right now.
Everything. I've changed everything. I think for a lot for many, many, many years, I ran in my mid 20s for a few years. I took some time off from like structured training for close to 7, 8 years. I did a lot of hiking. I did a lot of Orange Theory and Soul Cycle classes. I stayed, in the movement space, but I just wasn't training a lot. So I started training again with more consistent running in 2017. And I could just do a lot more than really what I can do now. I can't discount what I'm doing now. It is quite a bit. I run a lot of miles. My mileage is anywhere from 60 right now, I'm in a speed season, all the way up to like high 70s when I'm marathon training. And so with this change of training that has come through over the last, I guess it's going to be 3 years, when I switched coaches and we kind of went into this more higher mileage approach, I really had to revamp everything. I had to make sure that my sleep, which is the number one recovery tool, was dialed. And although I'm not perfect with it, and I'm a small business owner who coaches athletes, there's a lot of stress that goes on throughout the day. So, I may wake up in the middle of the night and think about like an athlete and something that's going on with them, but I really try and focus as much on getting good quality sleep as I can. That's going to be like the one thing that's like the most important thing, the priority for sure. I've been loving Epsom salt baths. They're phenomenal. And I've actually been loving them before my workouts and long runs versus after. And I feel like my legs kind of have this renewed freshness going into those efforts. Now, sometimes I might do it as a recovery tactic after those harder efforts. But what I like about it is that I can kind of recover from my last, let's say, workout over the course of the next few days and then take that Epsom salt bath right before the night before my long run. It just kind of, I think, takes everything, maybe any fatigue that's still lingering in my body, and it just kind of like gives it a big hug. So, I love that. I've been on the tart cherry juice train for about a year. I love the Cherry Bundy little like single serve packets to take with me when I travel. It reduces inflammation, which is awesome. I really felt the benefits through my last training cycle when I took that as a daily supplement, like after it was just part of like my post run recovery. Um, Mix of things that I take. And I really noticed a big kind of shift in how I felt later in the day taking that. And then I would say, lastly, I've increased my protein intake and specifically right after hard efforts. So I'm literally, if anyone's listening to this that runs workouts or long runs with me, so it'd be my team, but like I'll have like a protein shake literally at the car ready to go. So as soon as I stop my watch, I save my effort. I go straight to the car. I grab my water bottle and I grab my protein drink, and it's gone within 5 minutes. And that I feel like also has moved the needle quite a bit.
So it definitely sounds with those things, it's a very much more intentional way of managing your training load and training recovery, because it sounds like of the things that you're doing them so like intentionally, right? This is
Yeah.
something that, the recovery aspect is so important. It's not an afterthought. It's not about, if you get around to it, it's not about like, oh, it's fine if I delay refeeding after my workout because I'm super busy. As we age, those types of highly intentional supports become so important. But I also want to ask you, having now that you are in, I mean, high mileage, like 60 to 70 plus miles per week, that's a lot of running.
A lot.
How has Okay, let me ask you this. Has your training week structure changed with that based on what you were doing before?
In terms of how my runs are
Yeah, like, I mean, how
programmed.
do you split your volume up? Are you still on a 7-day microcycle? Like, where do your workouts fall? That sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So my workouts have stayed the same, but they have kind of enhanced a bit. So I still have my Wednesday workout. That's been something that I've had since I started working with a coach 5, 6 years ago. And now, if I'm not in marathon training, I still have a track or a tempo workout on Saturdays. And then my long run is structured on Sunday. And that is a more advanced trainings load because when I get to Sunday, my legs are very tired from like the workout the day before, or they're just tired. And so I'm really going through that long run on tired legs. So it's bittersweet for sure. And then I have been on a more on a different training cycle in terms of having 2 rest days a month. So they would land every other Monday. And my coach would then, if I have a rest day on a Monday, so I'm running 6 days that week, she would still find a way to get in about the same mileage that week. So, what that meant was in this last build for Indianapolis last fall, I ended up running a lot of 10-mile days. So, a lot of my just general training run was 10 miles, which seems like a lot, right? It's like that is some people's long run. That might be longer than some people's long run. Like if you're training for the 5K, your long run might be 8 miles. And this was my daily run. And what I noticed and what I thought was so cool about it was like the first time I went out there on like a Tuesday for 10 miles, I'm like, okay, this is going to take X number of minutes. I kind of know how long this is going to take. And, I was kind of tired by the end of that run. And then what I noticed over the last 2.5 months is by the time I was running a few, 10-mile just singular days, easy effort days, I felt strong. I felt good. I felt like it was just like a normal day for me. And I think that that's so cool when you can start to notice kind of your strength and where you're landing and how you're showing up um, in the training process.
That's so cool. Can I ask you approximately how long a daily 10 miler at an easy effort would take you?
Yeah, some days it would be just under like 90 minutes, and then some days a little bit closer to 95. So, like a lot of time on feet.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I want to highlight again, I think for maybe some listeners who are thinking like, that sounds like so much. I could never get there, right? Obviously, what we're
Yeah.
talking about with Sarah, right? This is more advanced. This is higher mileage. This is not something. This is something that you've
Yeah.
worked up to since you started running, but came from a place of pretty good base fitness going into it. And it also is time consuming, right? I think that's another thing because I want to talk about the time. Literally, the time we have available in our week to dedicate to our goals. A lot of people, even if we have specific goals we want to achieve, don't have the time in our week to dedicate to making that happen on the timeline we want it to.
Yes, 100%. I'm really grateful that I have flexibility within my schedule to kind of like make it happen. Now, this was one small snapshot of an entire year, right? So it was a 12-week training cycle for a marathon. And so I had to like I just had to figure it out. I had to make the time. I got to make the time. It was something my coach knew I was going to make a priority, and I had to say no to other things or kind of create this win-win of maybe I'm running with a friend, so I get the time on feet and I get to talk to my friend at the same time, or I bring my dog and so there's a few miles with my dog so she gets exercise and I'm also running. But I think it's really, really important to know where you're at now, and you can slowly build on where you're at now. Because when I started in 2017, I was probably running like 20 to 25 miles a week. And then every year just kind of built up a little bit more and a little bit more.
One of my really good friends, or my best friends, asked me, recent last year, she asked me, do you think I could run a sub 4 hour marathon? And we're the same age. And I said, absolutely. Physically, I 100% think you're capable of running a sub 4 marathon. But I said, but it's gonna take a lot more time in your week to do that. If you want to run that, that would just be a lot more. You'd have to build up a couple cycles. Like we would have to get to a place where you could do more of that performance oriented training. And she has a husband and she has a job and she has kids. And she was like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, like that's not something that's important to me. But some people are going to say that is important to me, right? Is it possible to have a whole bunch of these other things going on in my life that are really important to my life and go after a very aggressive goal? Because you just said when you're training, that was a snapshot in one part of a training cycle within your training year. And so when you're talking to a runner who has a very busy life, but also a goal that they're like, TikTok, I got to achieve this goal that requires a lot of time investment, where would
Yeah.
you start to have that conversation with them?
Yeah, it's a really important conversation to set the stage up before they get into it. Talk to them about how much time during the week it will take, or talking about how they're going to make it happen. I think one of the things that I see a lot with athletes who have families and they're really they spend a lot of time in their community, they volunteer, they have a full-time job, maybe inside, outside the house, all the things. There's so much going on. Say, how much time can you carve out in the morning? Or, if they are a nighttime runner, which usually, parents and people who are quite busy, they love that like morning run, get it off the list, move on with their day. How much time do you have? Let's see if we can work with that. And just having that honest conversation and making sure that they're aware of how much time it's going to take if they still want to achieve their goal. Now, it's not to say like we could still get everything, in a training week, under 60 minutes, your long run is still going to be, the long run. We can't get around that. It's still going to take a few hours out of the Saturday. And really, it's more like a half day out of the Saturday or the Sunday, depending on what day you run. But just setting the stage and seeing if they are okay with that, because the last thing you want to do is get into a cycle with an athlete and they don't understand either how much time it's going to take, they start to resent the sport, or they go all in and then everyone else around them isn't, either hopefully they're supporting them, but maybe there isn't that support there. And it's just a mix match of expectations. So trying to make sure that the expectations are in check before the athlete starts the cycle is really important.
A theme or kind of a commonality I noticed amongst some of the responses that I got to this question I'm going to say this in a way, and I don't mean this is not a pejorative. I'm not saying this as an insult, but and people are like, wait, should I be insulted if you say it this way? But this trying to achieve arbitrary goals on a specific timeline. And by
Mm.
that, I mean goals that you've just decided that you want to achieve, like outcome goals, right? I've
Yeah.
decided that I want to, like, I want to achieve this goal. And I want to achieve it by this time, or this by the time I'm this age. And so I got a couple of responses that were kind of similar to this.
Okay.
Yes, I just turned 40 and I'm still trying to break 4 hours and possibly BQ. Mild panic was part of the response. And I get it. So here, and I want to break this down and kind of address this from two angles in our putting our coaching hats on, right? So
Yeah.
for me, a sub 4 hour marathon and a Boston qualifying marathon time are two totally different goals,
Yeah.
because you can still run a BQ at any age, right? Not saying that everybody can, but like you have a lot of time left in your running career to run a BQ, even if we never get that sub 4.
Yes, I think there's always going to be those runners that have these specific timelines that they're trying to get this goal. And what I like to talk to them about is that, the journey is important, right? The journey is really important, and we can't necessarily put a timestamp on how long or how short of a process it's going to take. We just don't know. But we can kind of take a look and say, if that is your North Star, I call it a North Star in my coaching, like, if that is where you're going, let's start to work where you are now and then fill in the gap between and see what happens. And then we can take each cycle for where you are and really lean into that specific cycle, get the most that we can out of it, work on the processes. The outcome will be there at some point, whether it's in that specific training cycle or in future training cycles, and continue to move forward that way. But I don't love putting that, like, I need to have a BQ and the the sub 4 hour, like in this example, together. I think it's really important to separate it and also just talk through kind of the layout of how that would work.
I think it's also important to explore why, and I'm saying explore like why this goal is important to you. And by you, I mean anybody who's listening who's
Absolutely.
thinking about this goal, right? So I'm sure you've thought to yourself, why are the goals that I have important to me, right? Why are these things that I really want to spend my time and energy chasing? And so I think the same thing to everybody when we have these big goals that are going to take a while to achieve, and hopefully we get there.
Yeah.
Why is this goal so specifically important to you? And is it still important to you if it's a goal that you've had for a while? I think sometimes we get locked in by saying, well, this is a goal I used to have, and it still should be important to me because I've been chasing it for so long. To change it now would feel like I'm giving up, but it might not be important to you anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely happens over the course of our running journey. Like, goals change. Goals can change. What we want out of the sport can change. I see that all the time with athletes who maybe, finally reach that BQ time and then they say, I actually don't want structured training anymore. I just want to go out there and run when I want to run. And like, that's great. And then there's other athletes who are, maybe training for shorter distances and they want to go after the marathon. And it was the distance that, that marathon distance was always that I'm never running a marathon, like I'm never going to do it, but they eventually get there. And I think that's so true about life. Like we change, we grow, we evolve, we can change our mind. That is okay. That is part of it. But I think one of the coolest ways to kind of discover where you want to go, and if maybe the goal that you've set years ago, I've set this sub 3 hour marathon goal a long time ago, is discovering your running values. And that's something I work with my athletes on. We go through kind of a process of discovering 4 or 5 running values that are unique to them specifically. And then those values need to tie to their races that they want to train for, or we have to talk through why that race is so important. Because what I've found is that when running values and the races don't align, the athlete has a very tough time in the training cycle because they're training for something that maybe someone recommended that they run. Maybe they think it's something their coach wants them to run. Maybe it's something that their friends are running, but it doesn't really align with them. So when you can get that alignment, it's a much easier process.
I love that. I love that. I love that's something that you actively do. That's so important. That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I see this a lot where you lose the joy and you don't know why, but it's something, especially for, and I've talked about this on another forum, maybe on another episode, that these sometimes in the running world, it seems like you just said that somebody recommended that you run. Sometimes it seems like a lot of these big goals are goals that somebody else has told us have value,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, why is a sub 4 marathon so specifically like one of the biggest marathon goals that's out there? What is magic about four, like it, because it's a round number, right? We've been told that and
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
run a sub 4 marathon's amazing, right? Run a sub 3 marathon's incredible, to achieve one of these standards for Boston or for Chicago or for New York. These are all impressive things to do, but they're also things that we've been told in our running community are things that we should also find important and impressive, rather than, I think, setting our own goals in some respect.
Yeah, and everyone's goals are worthy. They're enough. I think there's a lot of hype around I need to have that round number, that sub 4 hour, that sub 2 hour half marathon, that 90-minute half, the 3:30 marathon, whatever it is. And it's okay if you want to chase that. And it's also okay if you have other goals that either don't align to outcome. I mean, that's also healthy, but also just goals that really land with you and where you're at and what you're going after, because then you will have that joy in training and you'll have that desire, that why to get out the door will be there. And I've gone through a training cycle before and I've coached runners before who've signed up for a race and they're not really aligned with it. And that is a very difficult place to be. And the more that we can align the love for our sport with also how we're training and what we're training for, I think the better off we'll be.
So, what if somebody then says, right, well, that's great, but like this goal really is important to me. And I'm concerned now that I'm in my early phase that my time to achieve it is running out. What I tend to see from runners in this position is we start to make bad decisions in our training, in our race selection. Have you observed this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think when that urgency to do something is there, yeah, I think we don't make the best decisions. I think I fell into this trap a few years ago. I ran my second marathon and it wasn't the outcome I wanted. And I thought I need to start taking more time off my marathon if I'm going to try and run this goal. And so I signed up for another marathon that was 4 months away. Yikes, yikes, yikes. It's basically like running a 5K 10 weeks after a marathon. It's not good. The training, that training cycle, I was flat. I didn't feel good. I took maybe 3 days off in between running that marathon. and getting into the next cycle. Not enough time physically. I think mentally I was okay, which was good. But I can kind of see where runners just sign up for races over and over and over again. And then what happens is you can either get injured, burnt out, or your race outcome isn't there because your body is so fatigued through the train, race, repeat. You're not giving it time to rest, recover. And so, really having a thoughtful plan over the course of, the training cycle, the year, I talked about that North Star. That's really kind of where you can start and work backwards on how to kind of set up your training and racing schedule. But I think anytime a runner tries to jump in too quickly into another race or another training cycle, it's not going to be in their best interest.
I mean, especially as we're talking about masters runners, right? Getting
Yeah,
older, we need more recovery time. We need to be more intentional about that. I like to
absolutely.
say, like, we can still have very high peaks, but our mountains are a lot more spread out.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think it's important to know if you are, let's say you're going after a marathon time. Once you run a marathon, you go through a training cycle, you have this snapshot. Okay, this is the time I have now. I'm X number of minutes away from achieving this goal. Maybe take a step back and work on speed. You could work on 5K training, you could work on threshold 10K training, and that's going to allow you to get hopefully a little bit faster so that marathon pace or that half marathon pace begins to feel a little bit easier, and you might make another stepping stone jump in that distance the next time you go after it.
Yeah, kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Because what I think the kind of at the where people are also concerned, right? It's not necessarily the decline in performance eventually, but it's that plateau and kind of being stuck on that plateau. And how do I know when in this age range? How do I know if it's a plateau that's a normal plateau, or how do I know if this is the plateau that is, then precedes a decline? The only way to know is to just keep going.
Keep going.
The only way you're going to know is to figure it out is just to try and see what happens. I think it's very important to acknowledge that a lot of concerns about running out of time to achieve certain goals for runners who are in especially their mid to late 30s, it's a lot of time that people are having kids, having babies, raising kids, are very busy. And I got a lot of responses from runners specifically around either feeling like they need to choose between focusing on performance and having children, concerns about taking time off to have kids and never kind of getting back to where they were before, concerns about, concerns just about having to return and being, kind of starting from that place of being kind of like a beginner again, even though you're not. So I'll tell you my perspective. When I'm talking to a runner who is expressing the very real fear and concern. Having kids is a lot, and on top of that, you are now concerned that this thing that you love to do, which maybe you're pretty good at, you'll never be able to do again in the same way, or be able to have it be fulfilling in the same way, because you'll never be faster again. I know we've seen our friends, our peers, coaches in our community, as well as elite
Yeah.
runners in the world, not only get back to, but exceed their
Mhm.
performance as a postpartum athlete compared to where they were before they had kids.
Yeah, like I think it's important to make sure that it's normalized at that it will be a process and a journey to get back there. That's super normal. Plus, now you have a little human to take care of, and like getting out for runs might be a little bit harder, or you need to be more intentional with the scheduling, or you're fitting it in while the baby's napping or sleeping. But what I've seen out of the mother runners that I've coached is they are phenomenally strong. Their mental strength is incredible, and they're only getting faster. And that is true with teammates that I run with in Boulder, as well as females that I coach on the Elevate team. And it's so inspiring to see because they may be that runner that has the 60 minutes, or there's one that I coach, you know her, she has about 45 minutes most days, and I'm like, we're going to do the best that we can do, 45 minutes most days, and we're going to make this a win. And she's only getting faster. And I think it's such a good example that we all are going through this journey, and our road on this journey to get to the destination is different. And that can be true when life ends up happening and we have kids and we take a break and we come back to running. Or maybe we are injured and we're coming back. Like the road is always going in a different direction. And we can still get to that start line the same way that we originally envisioned, maybe even stronger. Because when you can mix up the training too, kind of give your body a new stimulus, there's really cool things that can happen.
Something I heard recently, and I'm not saying this in a way to say that anybody regretted having children, but what I heard was something to the effect of, life is about making choices and minimizing regrets,
Yeah.
because we have to acknowledge that in our life there will be choices we have to make that do lead to a what if. We can't do all the choices all the time, and there are always going to be doubts. What if I'd taken the other path? What if I'd made the other decision? But that's always going to be there. You can
Yeah.
have that about any decision you make in your entire life, but that can't be what you dwell on.
Absolutely. We get to be committed in our decisions and how we move forward. And I think it was like Mel Robbins. She was talking about this on how you like it's very easy to look back and then second guess your decision on what you decided to do and the what if around it. But what if you just stay committed in your decision? You look forward, you stay focused moving forward, and you do the best that you can do there. Something really magical can happen. And of course, as we know, it's never on the timeline we want it to happen on. So staying patient and staying consistent and continuing to show up, you'll eventually get there. Wherever it is that you're going. I had a lady on my podcast. Her name's Michelle Baxter. I think we're the same age, and she's a mother, she's a runner, and she's still getting faster at the marathon distance, and she's well under 3 hours. And she's really inspiring to talk about how she balances all of it. And I think it's really important to know that like you don't know your potential until you keep going, and then you eventually discover it. Like you mentioned, it's in hindsight. And I think that's one of the coolest things of this sport. Like doing your best that you can every single day, that's going to look different. It's going to look different every single day. But saying I did my best today, whatever that is, something is better than nothing. And just continuing to move forward. You may reach a breakthrough when you didn't think a breakthrough was going to happen. And that's one of the coolest things about running and being in this sport. And of course, as a coach, seeing those breakthroughs happen, and also just seeing the consistency, seeing the love of running and going out there and just doing what you love every day, being consistent, see what happens.
Great question or response that I got. And I think this is really important that we talk about, because this is probably in the back of some people's minds as well. So this person responded, yes, I'm 51 and I can still shave a few minutes from my 5K, but I'm wondering, why should I train so hard for marginal results?
Did she say a few minutes from my?
Seconds. Sorry, second. Oh my God. Did I say minutes?
I'll
It's
take a few
seconds.
minutes.
I would love to shave a few minutes off my 5K at 51 seconds, right? Marginal gains, right? Why should I bust my ass for potentially a couple seconds
Yeah.
improvement?
It all goes back to the why. What's important to you? Some people, those seconds are very important for, maybe that outcome goal that they're seeking. They're looking for that certain number. So it's all based on your why and what drives you. Like I personally love training. I love it so much that I think even when I start, to see that I'm slower or whatever, I'm still going to train. I'm still going to have a coach. Like I love that. I love it so much. And I think it's just, going back to that, like, why are you doing it? Does it it's a balancing act. Does training really hard fulfill your cup? Is it something that is worth it to reach that outcome? And if it's a no, also totally okay. The other side to this is maybe you don't have to train hard to get one or two, three, a couple of seconds off the 5K. Sometimes less is more. So it could just be a change in training.
Yeah. And that's, I think, thinking as a master's runner, 40 plus, I I mean, talking about the way that your training has changed, I know the way that I train my athletes who are 40 plus, certainly those who are 50 plus, we train a little bit differently, right? We have
Yeah.
more recovery. I like the down weeks to be, in some cases, more frequent.
Yeah.
We are more focused on maintaining general consistency rather than trying to do like big flashy things. It can seem boring, but if we can keep you healthy and consistent, like that's where the magic happens. But people don't want that, right? They don't want boring consistency. They don't want this. They want like, no, no, no. I want to be able to do the workout that I did when I was 25. Like, I want to be able to do 5 Orange Theory fitness classes a week. I want to be able to do all these really high intensity, hard things all the time, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's no, you can't. Sorry, you can't. Not
Yeah, and
anymore.
I think that's also part of that silent contract that all runners sign is that running is and can be pretty boring. It can be the check the box. We got to keep this run in the easy effort today. This is a recovery run. This is going to be a little bit slower. It's not going to be super flashy, super buzzy all week long, but you're going to have those little bits and pieces. And maybe a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, the training plan's going to look different, right? Maybe a little bit different, but that flashy is still there. It's just going to look a little different, and that's okay.
The last thing I want to talk about is helping people not discount their own achievements just because you won your age group, but maybe there were two people in your age group, right? Or you won your local race, but 5 people showed up, right? Or maybe you were top 100 out of 10,000, right? But like I hear this all the time from runners who are over 35, because that's typically when age groups start to come into play and say, well, it's like it doesn't count, right? Like, I got first in my age group, but I was the only one there. I'm like, okay, that still counts. Like, you crossed the finish line. Oh, yeah, it's a BQ, but it's not a real one. It's an age graded one. That is, my gosh, why are people so hard on themselves? I just want to shake you and be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that all the time too. And I think it's just very normal to downplay maybe the work that we do. And I think it's also true to some extent that like we don't do a good job in the running community or on social media to highlight how hard it is to do the things that we do. Because what we're doing is hard. And you're showing up, you're being consistent, you gave it your best effort in that race. You got first place in your age group. Celebrate that. That's huge. That's awesome. And pat yourself on the back and be okay with it. I think I hear it all the time, but I think as long as you are showing up, you're consistent, you're doing the hard work, that's really where the pat on the back comes from. And like, yeah, you get to have all these other kind of like fun ways to celebrate your race day or your workout, or your training or wherever kind of that those ideas are coming into play about discounting. Um, but you're still doing the hard work. And that's really the most important piece.
And we also have, I think it also ties into our tendency to want to continually improve and strive for greater achievement, right?
Yeah.
It also could be known as moving the goalposts, right? So, if you finish a race and you won your age group, um, even though there are only 3 of you there and you were all going to be, placed in your age group somehow, to say like that didn't count or that counted less, I should have done this, or this would have been more impressive. Or when you achieve that big goal, this is something I'd be very curious to talk to you about after you run your sub 3 marathon, Sarah, is what happens when you do achieve that gigantic goal, right? Where,
Yeah.
like, where do you go? Is that it? You're like, cool, hands dusted off, like, I'm done now. No, we almost always say, well, what next? And so I think this concern, this fear of not being able to achieve goals, right? The whole topic
Mhm.
of our conversation is simply tied to, what if I can no longer continue to improve kind of in a broad way, right? And that fear of never being good enough, if that makes sense. So, yeah, it's all very existential. And if you're going through this, explore all of these areas.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, like you may feel a certain way at 37, 38 of like the end all be all is this number. This is where I have to go. I'm not moving the goalpost after this place, right? Something I've started to realize as I have gotten older is I'm going to do the best that I can do. And then whatever that is, I'm going to be okay with that, knowing I did everything I could do to get there. And I think when you can have that balance, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. There's not as much pressure there, and you can have a little bit more fun with it. And you're not always just chasing the next thing. You can really just be present with where you're at.
Yeah, I love that. Because that is that I think that should be the goal. I hope for many people, going back to, owning your decisions and committing to something and trying not to get lost in the what if, but also understanding that there are just going to be things that happen to you that you can't control. Like for women, like we can't control when we go into perimenopause, right? When
Right.
we hit menopause, it just happens and we're going to have to deal with it, right? It sucks. Let's minimize regrets. Let's make good
Yeah,
choices and move forward. And I think that is really all we're trying to do here is control the things we can control, make good choices and minimize regrets.
absolutely. And at the end of the day, at the end of all of it, if you can say that you've done those things, that is one heck of a career. That is great. Congratulations. Like you did it. You
You
did it.
won running.
Well, yeah, 100%. Yeah, like your running career, like you've done the best that you can do, and you should be really proud of that. And I think that's true for every single day of running and being proud of what you do, because it is hard work. It's not something that's easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And to really be proud of where you're at. Um,
So, Sarah, do you have any fun races on your calendar this year?
well, I have the Chicago Marathon. That's my A goal marathon for the year. I'm super excited about that. And I'll be doing heat training this summer. I have a tune up half marathon 7 weeks out from that race. And that is really my focus. So right now I'm working on speed, and I just ran a 5K race in Houston. I have some 10Ks coming up before I get into Chicago training.
Fun. I'm
Yeah.
always curious. Do you feel a benefit because you live up at altitude? Do you feel a benefit when you go down towards sea level to race, or
Sometimes.
sometime?
Sometimes. So if it's humid, I don't feel any difference. It just feels the same. And the humidity needs to be high enough with a higher temperature to make it feel like I'm running at altitude. But sometimes, yeah, I feel like I fly, and that's a really fun feeling.
I've always been curious about that. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today and joining me in this conversation. For runners who want to follow you or learn more about you or listen to your podcast, where can they do that?
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. You can follow me on Instagram at Sarah, SAY, Runs Happy, and at Elevate Your Running. The Elevate Your Running podcast is available every Thursday with a new episode on your favorite listening platform. And of course, my website is elevateyourrunning.com.
Thank you, listeners, for being here. And Sarah, I will see you in Chicago, and I'm very excited for it.
Woohoo! I'm so excited for it.